Hello, and welcome to the How I Tested That podcast. I'm your host, David J. Bland. I'm an author and advisor, and I'm fascinated with testing early-stage ideas. I've helped companies all around the world, and in this podcast, I connect with entrepreneurs and innovators who had the courage to test their ideas with real people in the market, with sometimes surprising results. Please join us as we explore the ups and downs of experimentation together. In this episode, we interview Charles Sims. Charles is the ex-CTO for the Los Angeles Clippers NBA team, and currently founder of Skafld, an end-to-end venture studio partner turning visionary ideas into real-world success. Charles shares his journey from the entertainment industry to becoming the CTO of the Clippers. We dug into how experimentation can improve the NBA fan experience. Everything from how he and his team had to quickly invent an engaging yet remote fan experience during the COVID lockdown, to how he used the Unreal Gaming engine to test the assumptions made during the build of the new cutting-edge Intuit Dome. We discussed the lessons learned from his time with the Clippers to the evolving landscape of venture capital. We wrap up with the impact of AI on investors and how it can bridge communication gaps between technical and non-technical teams. Enjoy. Welcome to the podcast, Charles.
Thanks for having me, David. Glad to be here.
I'm so excited to chat with you because I want to know the inner workings of one of my favorite sports, NBA.
Yeah.
I want to know a little bit about how you approach sort of testing things and how you learn and how that's transformed how you're thinking about things today. But maybe we can start with you just giving a little bit of background on yourself before we jump into some of our testing stories.
Sure. So I originally came out to LA in the entertainment industry of the business behind the scenes of working as a line producer, production manager, which was basically the person who manages schedules, manages budgets. And I tended to always be the only one who knew how to use Excel and QuickBooks and got shoved into that corner pretty quickly. So while I came out here wishing one day maybe I could have been an actor or a star, I learned I'm much better behind the scenes, making sure everything's running smoothly. So I spent a number of years in management consulting prior to actually going full-time as head of technology for the LA Clippers, which is usually where most of my stories come from and stem from. So many amazing draft day stories of where the shot clock is broken up until 20 seconds before the game starts, the breakdown of the server room from flooding, and we're using all these jerseys to be able to mop up the water before we ruin our server room. But spent 8 years with them, and then was at United Talent Agency for 3 years as their CTO, leading all of their innovation technology within entertainment, which tends to be one of the more legacy style businesses. And as AI really exploded in that time period, I realized there's so much more to be able to be done in these smaller and smaller businesses, almost even like the micro 2-3 person billion-dollar, trillion-dollar businesses are coming from AI. So I leaned into that and started my own SaaS that helps would-be entrepreneurs take their idea, translate it into a business stack with a pitch deck, market analysis, financial analysis, how much it's going to be, blah, 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 blah. And that led down the road of what we have now, which is a venture studio using that manifesto and framework to take any product that you have from zero to full MVP and go to market within 90 days.
Oh, there's so much I want to talk about in your answer. I want to actually back up a bit because as much as I want to talk about venture studios and the impact of AI, I can't neglect going back and talking about the Clippers. So unfortunately, I'm a Warriors fan, so I apologize in advance for that. But I'm fascinated with the NBA. I once gave a keynote and the head of innovation for the Orlando Magic was there. And I was just like trying to talk to him a little bit before my keynote. I was like, hey, what's it like, inside? And it seems like it could be really creative, but very stressful. And because you're putting on such a production and everything. And he was talking about these big markets. And so LA is an amazing market, right? And his thing was, well, we're trying to be innovative and try to compete with these other cities. But now it's almost like the venture fund is the new Ferrari in a way, where the big players want to go to places like LA because of the markets. And I just found like it's so amazing to see how that impacts people's thought process around innovation inside their company. But if you could share anything about just from a CTO perspective, like what kind of risk do you run into being the CTO of the Clippers and how you try to address that risk on sort of like a day-to-day basis?
Well, let's go back to a couple of topics that you even brought up that I think will be very interesting to most folks out there, where if you look at any NBA or professional sports teams, these are $2, $3, $4 billion valued businesses. And if you think of any other industry that has a $2 billion business, how many employees do you think they actually have? Well, on average, an NBA team has between 300 and 750 employees. So it's a mom and pop shop. As much as you think there's these dozens and dozens, and everybody has all the help they could ever want, they are run like mom and pops. And so you have $1 billion franchise or multi-billion dollar franchise, that's the brand, but the people who are executing behind the scenes, it's as lean as possible. And what was nice, at least for my experience with Clippers, there's a lot of that VC entrepreneurial style methodology and just personalities that you're working with. You work with some of the best, some of the most creative, some of the folks coming from other industries bringing their expertise in there. But it was so fast moving. There wasn't an off season is an old dirty word that is no longer true. Off season is when you're trying to do as much as you can. And so kind of just clicking into that, one of the things that most people don't realize is innovation has to happen. Otherwise, you can't keep up. You can't keep up with other teams. You can't keep up with the other leagues. You have to continuously be innovating, whether it's on the sports for therapy, for mental health, for the plays and scouting and all the things that can go into that, which is since Moneyball has really leaned into technology. And then on the business side of how do you make that experience for a fan the best, most personable experience that they've ever had and have it be unique every time they go. Even if they go to 40 games a year, it has to still feel like a unique experience every time, not just the same banner ads, not just the same in-game activities. You really have to have that morph of as soon as you walk through the gates, you're now there. You're in this space. Just like Disneyland does it in an amazing way. Every stadium tries to do a similar thing.
And I can't even imagine with a group that small. I remember I used to go to games at Oracle, and it was sort of like, Oracle had its own sort of blue collar kind of vibe, and everyone was like really into it. And then you go to something like Chase, where it's like this giant like compound almost in a way with all this technology. And in a way, it's like, well, how do we have much different things to work with there for an experience. And you all have the new stadium too, which I do want to get to.
Let's shout out Brian Fulmer. Brian Fulmer was one of the leaders over there at the Warriors, and everything that they did between him and Daniel Broslovsky, who headed up their innovation, did an amazing job at the Chase Center. It was really one of the things that we looked at as we looked at Intuit.
Oh, interesting. I didn't know that. That's interesting. Well, I guess it makes sense that you would look around the league and see what other people are doing and chat and try to share.
Well, we're not competing against each other on the business side, right? So the basketball side, yes, it is church and state. You go to MIT Sloan, they're having all of their back of room conversations. But on the business side, we definitely collaborated. Even after the pandemic, I led a call we got up to 180 professional teams in North America, your CIOs, your CTOs, all calling for some commiseration, but also like, hey, what are you doing for this? How are you going about that? And there's such a collaborative atmosphere that, yeah, a lot of us knew one another, from the Milwaukee Bucks, who were the ones who built right before us, to Chase, who built 2 times before us, to the new SoFi. Like, you start to have those folks who are always willing to pick up the phone and help out.
I love that. Like you said, there's a difference between the business side of things and then the team, competition side of things. And I think that's a good perspective to have. So when I think back to, let's just go back to the pandemic, even with the NBA and how you all innovated through that. I can't even imagine what that was like behind the scenes especially now that you're saying, like, we did not have a giant team and a lot of resources, and we're trying to deal with this, like almost like this black swan event of everything is kind of shut down. Just explain a little bit behind the scenes of kind of like your thought process and how you were trying to test things and sort of what worked and what didn't. Like, anything you can share with us would be fascinating.
Yeah. So if I remember the timeline correctly, it was a week or so before everything shut down. My CIO community out here, the UCLA Innovate and the Sim Connect, which are 2 big CIO CTO groups of your regular industries, academia, and government CIOs and CTOs who come together and talk about what they're doing. About a week before, we were having that discussion of, hey, this might be something where we have to work from home for a week or 2. So maybe we start doing phased, half of the organization works from home for one day and half works from home for the other day, just so we can test out our systems and make sure everything works. And when I brought that to the executive team, they're like, absolutely not. Don't even think about it. It's not happening. Don't waste your money. Don't do anything. And then a couple of days go by. Okay, well, maybe think about it, and we could try to plan plan, but we're not actually going to do anything because it's definitely not going to happen. 2 days before the fateful game where everything shut down, which was, I still remember, if it was a Wednesday and it was Utah versus OKC, where halfway through the game, the ball goes up, comes down, everybody has to leave. But even 2 days before that, it was, okay, we're going to plan, we're going to figure this out, but we don't have enough laptops for everybody, so we're just going to have to think of how do we go and make it happen. That day the shutdown happens, my team goes on site. We wrap everybody's desktops, monitors, everything into their own packages. We cycle through the next 48 hours, all of the team or all of the members with a certain number of people at once, grab their devices, take them home. And then we had a hotline of my team that was continuously making sure everybody was set up and ready to go from home. Luckily, the previous year and a half, we had moved everything to the cloud. We were the first NBA team that was fully reliant on all cloud services. And so we didn't have to VPN anybody in. We didn't have to have remote desktops. So it just was, if you had internet, you could keep working. And so it was a testament to being not prepared in that week before, like we really, really probably could have, but being prepared for the year and a half or so prior. So that way we could, in 48 hours, just get everybody fully back up online on Teams running as they go.
Wow. Yeah. I think there's something about just acting in those moments, like not being sort of stuck, feel like, oh, we can't make any moves. I feel like you sort of have to just act and find your way through it.
So it's funny. It's how I got the moniker of Hurricane CTO. It was that Charles is always a hurricane when it comes to these situations, because when crisis hits, I jump in, I start delegating, I get things going. Like it feels like the aid team that comes and gets helicoptered in and telling people to do this, that, and the other. But once you're back up and the calm comes back, I can now go move on to the next thing. And my team goes, oh my God, this looks like a hurricane came through, whether it's cords are being ripped or whatever it may be. But you're right. You have to act and then act in ways that you can quickly troubleshoot to what you needed. If you're troubleshooting an issue, quickly decide how to do it by what we call a binary troubleshooting. But if you're trying to make a decision, make one that you still can have some backup and then just keep making iterative decisions. So you're always making momentum forward and never just analysis paralysis.
I like that framing. I like that framing of decision making. Yeah. So let's talk about, okay, so everything's shutting down. The ball comes up, comes down, everyone goes home. What's the fan experience? Like, how do you even begin to look at, okay, we have these assumptions now of how we can recreate this like fan experience and make it enjoyable and everything. Like anything you can share about how you try different things to just get by when we were kind of in shock.
So the league had decided they were going to put up the video boards in the bubble in Florida. And they were going to figure out some way to get the different fans to show up on those video boards. They partnered with Microsoft. They decided, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to do a Teams call and then be able to have you watch the game as you're reacting. But what we found very quickly was it's not as fun to just watch it on your computer versus just watching it on TV. So most people would start looking away. They'd go and do something. And what I thought was, how do we bring that fan experience that is in the live stadium to them? And so then we quickly bought a couple crappy church streaming type devices, got a camera, set up a mini studio in the offices, and we brought Chuck along, who's our mascot. We had our announcer, and now we created an in-game live experience. So when you're watching, we actually cut to our commercials. We cut to our guys doing the kiss cam or showing up which one of the fans was the best dress or whatever it may be. And all of a sudden it went from 20 or so were watching out of the 50 to every single fan was engaged. We were getting asked to get more and more people on the wait list so they could watch. And other teams took the same approach. And then you slowly saw this virtual production start to happen. It was really, really cool. So I think your ethos of, we didn't spend a bunch of money to do this. We spent maybe a couple $100 off of gear, either on Craigslist or Amazon and eBay, to do the equivalent of like a church live stream. But then people don't care about, it doesn't have to be absolutely perfect because it's still so much better than just watching through your computer.
Yeah, I think we always talk about this idea of like a minimum viable product. And so often it's the customer or the consumer who's consuming it is determining the quality and if that's good enough. And I know you'd be a little bit embarrassed about, oh, we got this set up, but if they find it an enjoyable experience, then who are you to judge that it's not good enough,
in my opinion, pandemic was one of the real big pushes to how quickly we digitize broadcast and digitize the streaming, where prior to the pandemic, a frame, 2 frames of black or downtime on any broadcast channel was people are getting fired. It's bad. Because they thought as soon as a TV goer watches that or sees that, they're going to change the channel to something else. And in reality, we've learned, no, we'll deal with buffering, we'll deal with these mini ads, we'll deal with the pop-up. If it's good content, we're going to watch it. And so that's allowed so much of the heavy hardware-focused type of broadcast equipment to shift now into more of the software-defined era, and really innovative stuff can happen. And what we have now was, I think it really was pioneered from that time in the pandemic.
I can just say personally, a lot of my training, I do a lot of training and coaching and consulting, and I did some virtual, but a lot of it was in person. And I remember going locked down, and I went all in on virtual. And some of my peers were like, oh, just what are you doing that for? Just wait and see. It's going to be, it's not going to last very long. And I went all in on it, and I jumped. It was like this crisis where I was forced to act in a way where I had, okay, how can I break up my stuff into modules, do it virtually? When we did our masterclasses, we used to do them in person. When we did them virtually, we had a musician that was streaming from his camper. He would do the music during the breaks live, and people loved that. That was one of the I don't know if people even remembered what I taught, but they remembered the person playing the music during the break, and they're like, this is amazing. And so we kept doing it. And it was like, how do we create those connections online? Because as you said, they have another monitor, they get distracted. And it's like, how do we create this where it doesn't feel as if I'm just sitting in front of a monitor, semi-absorbing the information?
Well, I think you synthesized a really good example. When I'm explaining to people, you could take almost any product today, and with the development methodologies out there, with the help of AI, there can be almost any product that's in market that I think you could build in 6 months or less. Because the hardest part isn't building the product as it is what should be built. So when you are looking at Dropbox, you already know what the public has approved as what is required and what's not. The product team that thinks, oh, here's a great idea and we have to absolutely have that, and it's never actually used. All of that is the waste that comes from not having your product in market to get that feedback very, very quickly. And so that's why, without that, you're going to waste so much time and money building stuff that doesn't matter.
Yeah, I think that's what I'm drawn to in this just area of expertise, because I was at startups where I worked nights and weekends and nobody used the stuff in the end. And we followed all these great delivery methodologies. We were agile and everything. I was very frustrated by that experience and got drawn into this sort of by just sheer frustration at the beginning. So we're talking about the pandemic. We're talking about how you had to respond to that. And fast forward a bit to the new stadium. Were you able to take what you've learned through the pandemic and apply it to that? What were some big assumptions you had going into such an amazing building, but there's so much work that goes behind that? What were some of the ways you tested sort of that design, or anything you could share?
Yeah, one of the stories that I like to talk about that I heard happened a lot with the other stadiums that were being built was usually the process when you are building a new stadium as a team, you go out and you get what's called an owner's rep. So that is a team of consultants that are there because they've done this before. They've been part of a number of builds, they have a couple of experts in there, but they're not doing work. What they're doing is helping advise you on who you should select for your master builder, who you should select for your different sponsors, or your almost the expert portfolio / project manager of the build. And as we get into adding more and more people into this room of here's the future vision, and distilling all of these different things from this brand new Halo board, which is 600 linear feet of a oval inside and outside screen center hung that no one has ever done before, to this massive screen in the front area that you can come at any time of day. This battleship gets so complicated so quickly, and it already has momentum from the first day, and momentum is so hard to overcome. One of the things that we kept running into, at least I realized, was we were making decisions on things that we didn't necessarily have the full understanding or scope of what we're making the decision on. And one of the good examples I usually bring up is the Halo board was Steve's baby. That was his dream. He was so excited for that, not because it's just a flashy technology thing. He wanted to truly enhance the experience for every fan. No matter where you sat, you had a good seat. And that goes for those on the floor all the way up to the 300 section. in the nosebleeds because he wanted you to be able to experience the game. But even though every render we got made it look amazing, like it was going to fit perfectly, some of these renders that we'd see from the inner in the bowl or maybe of the grand staircase or some of the shops, they're just photoshops. And so they weren't built on what you could say is reality in the programs that the construction team is using to design in Revit or CAD or anything like that. And so it didn't feel right to me. And what I R&D'd quickly with my team was, can we build a pipeline from their actual Revit and the cut lists and the architectural pieces into Unreal, which is a gaming engine, so we can now visualize these things. And very quickly, we start to see we have this false confidence trap of, well, you're the expert, so obviously you guys know everything. Everything you show us is good to go. But we all know anytime we've worked with consultants, they say, oh, tell me your problems and I'll fix all of them. But you didn't tell me that when we were first talking about this. And it's not my fault that I didn't think of that very simple thing that you have no expertise. It's your fault, Mr. or Mrs. Customer. And one of the best parts was the Halo board was 3 feet too tall. So if we were to go with the original Halo board, the size and dimensions that they were talking about, at the top of the bowl, you couldn't see the other side of the court. You couldn't see 10 feet into the court. And so we were just out of one weekend's worth of noodling and skunk working this thing together and getting it into place. It became the standard for how we made decisions moving forward. We don't want pre-baked fake imagery anymore. We don't want the beautiful terrazzo tile that looks like it's really, really nice, but you can't tell where it ends and where it starts, where the walls are. It's like we wanted to be able to make those decisions in the composite and not just one off.
Wow. It's the first time I've heard that story. So you were getting it into the Unreal Engine, which is basically game design. So you could maybe just rotate around and click through, So did you use that for other aspects of the build then? You mentioned you've kind of learned from that.
It became one of my favorite weekend activities. So we got it to the point where we were the first stadium to do real rendered 3D walkthroughs. So if you wanted to see your seat, we could actually walk you from your garage in your car all the way to where your seat is, and not just the one canned kind of crappy 3D visualization. And then you want to look over there. Okay, now it's going to just shift to that one angle. Like it had the full engine going in it. Then it started opening up so many other possibilities where we had acquired the Forum during the pandemic. Our team had never managed a music venue before. And I spent because I was part of the M&A team, I spent the first 90 days or so as we were pulling all of the technology from the MSG group with the GM who taught me how the operations happen, what load in, load out is, well, all these different frustrations that happen just because it's the logistics of the building, which brought me back to, wait, could I talk to a tour manager before they even get on site, understand the dimensions of their truck, and simulate pulling where we can pull their truck, what pieces we can pull in, what corners are too tight versus just the gut feelings of, well, we'll figure out when they get here and then we'll just have 2 extra load-in days, because those are really expensive days, especially for touring. And there's a ton of other examples that I could give, but once you are working with an engine that actually is built within reality rather than just theory, and the systems are connected, and the original digital twins before they became people digital twins, it can help you make much more confident decisions about complex systems that humans just can't really comprehend all those pieces together.
Yeah, I feel like in all these stories, there's this thread of your problem-solving abilities plus using tech in ways maybe not even the way it's intended, but blending that together in a way that works, and you can learn from that. And then if that's something scalable, you can figure that out later. But this knack of what's the right tool for the job here? Oh, this usually isn't used for this, but I think this can help us here. I think that's an interesting thread through all your stories so far.
It's something we like to call camera ready. So going back to the entertainment world, camera ready for art designers means you don't have to build a piece of furniture that is perfect for if you're right there. It just needs to look good enough that if you look through a camera, it's fine. And so I take that approach to a lot of stuff. Is it camera ready? Great. We'll be able to fix it. We'll be able to iterate on it, but don't take 6 months to do something that we could have done in 6 days and then now have that 6 months to actually do real innovative work on top of what's already been there.
I like that. I like that framing. So we can talk about the NBA for hours, but moving forward to more present day. So you've taken kind of everything you've learned from there. You did some other work, but you're really kind of in this venture studio space now. And that's a space that fascinates me as well. Having tinkered with that a little bit at Neo, we weren't really a traditional venture studio, but we were assembling kind of startup teams around ideas and building MVPs. And sometimes we were building with other startups, sometimes we were building with corporations. And I always thought, wow, if I was to do that again today, then there's so many more tools, because this was early 2010s, there's so many more tools with AI and everything related that even that model would be completely different with and accelerated on based on what's available today. So I'm just really curious, like what you're up to now and kind of how you're testing this idea out of a venture studio, and like anything you can share with us about your thought process behind that.
Yeah, so we officially launched Skafld Studios, which is a multi-tiered venture studio. And the idea is we have our first tier, which is called Skafld Ignite and Ignites. It's built on the ethos of these stories I've been talking about. So some internal ideas, just problems that we as a team or some of our close innovators around us say, like, here's a problem that just no one solved yet and it doesn't make sense. And we take our manifesto that I wrote when I first left operator world into VC world to really think of everything as product, whether it's a service, it's a process, or a thing, productize everything. So it's standardized and it's repeatable. And that manifesto then allows us to fast fail as many of these ideated jam ideas that we have. But if they're really there and they have something, then we have investment backing to go and push it past that first MVP. But those 90 days are really ruminating on it, and we bring the teams together. We have personalities that are really good at that first piece, that ideation, throwing spaghetti at the wall, getting it going. And then they don't want to keep going with it. They usually want to get back to the next new idea. And then we have the different personalities that actually take it to the next space. Then the next tier up is called Skafld Excel. And that's the accelerator. That's your typical working with teams that already have an idea and some semblance of a product, or maybe just the idea and the capital to get there, but they're not exactly sure how, or they don't want to have to be the CTO and CEO. They don't have technical ability, or they don't have a product team, or whatever it may be. So the agreement there is they have to follow our manifesto, and then we fully surround them in the Skafld OS so that they have the AI development practices. They have a lot of the things that move them through that pipeline as quickly as possible, like a normal accelerator or incubator, but not with requiring human personnel to have 80 mentors to be able to mentor you. It's like the framework itself already gets you 80% there. And that's where the Skafld name comes from, is we can take any idea and get it to 80% very, very quickly. And then it's the last 20 that's really special. Then finally is the Skafld Elite, and that's where we're assembling those SWAT teams. So you are about to do your next raise, and for some reason you're just not getting the traction with investors, or you need to change the narrative. We come in, whether it's for corporate innovation or if it's for actual startups themselves, with this team of, the SWAT team that I have in my space to get the best innovative CIO or CTO or head of revenue in esports or whatever it may be, and then surround that for that next raise and then let them go on their way.
That's incredible. I love how you have the tiered framing and how you're thinking about this. And I guess from an venture point of view, I'm curious. I've said some things in the past where, I was kind of an early adopter of lean startup. And before that, I was, at 3 different startups for about 11 or 12 years. And I always felt like there was a disconnect between the VC community and this sort of like fail fast or test fast mentality. So, and I do a lot of work in Silicon Valley, and I know not every investor is the same. But I do feel sometimes like we want to invest in this kind of like dream. It's almost like you have a team and a dream, and I don't want to quote like the Silicon Valley show, but it's like you're a pure play, like you're pre-revenue and you could be $1 billion unicorn, and we like that vision. And in reality, what I see happening, at least in my day-to-day advising, and I still, coach startups, is they're out there grinding away, trying to get traction, trying to find out the actual market size of what something is. And that might be much smaller than that giant dream. Do you feel like this disconnect between us wanting to invest in a giant dream and the reality of, well, we need like base hit level funding to get to something eventually, is that changing at all? Or what's your take on that? Or even if you agree with me on that?
Yeah, I definitely agree. And it's changing. So the reason why I originally originally had built Investment, which was that SaaS platform, was to get you past that first initial, is this idea worth it? Because going through that platform, you quickly have an estimated valuation based on 5 of the different valuation methods. Is your management team strong enough? Is your idea niche enough but still have a large enough serviceable market? That's really, really valuable to get you. But that's table stakes these days. Like anybody can do that with chatting through with the right prompts. What we're seeing now is shifting from historically VCs would invest in the dream and potential of what it could be, but only on the personnel who could back up that dream. And usually it was mostly on the CEO, not the CTO, or the co-operational officer versus the co-technical, whatever. Now what you're seeing is investment decks have shifted from really salesy, like flashy, let me talk about all the features, to no, it's my job actually to get you to be confident that this is the right problem and it makes sense and that I can execute it. Not trying to sell you on absolutely every whiz bang that it's going to do and the big dream, the Lamborghinis to the moon, but it's much more now focused on the technical co-founder. If you don't have one, you need to find one because that's the person who's actually going to execute your dream. And then 2, the shift to you have to have something. It's so easy to get something up. You have to have something before we're going to invest. We don't invest in ideas anymore. We invest in something. And that's where micro SaaS has really changed the game of, look, I can get something up in a weekend, throw it on Product Hunt, do a couple articles on Medium and Substack. All of a sudden, I get 1,000 subscribers. They might only last until they realize it's just a ChatGPT wrapper. But still, those are examples of where investors see it's so easy to get into it. Why can't you at least show something more than slideware? This is different from the PE world. So then now the PE world is very much in the, we want to gobble up, we want to consolidate, it's still in more of the historical way of taking multiple things and trying to buy exclusivity in a market or trying to bring synergies together.
Yeah, I like that framing. With the PE world, I spent some time there. I've done some training and some coaching with some folks. And I think my take has been, hey, use my risk framework for that. Look at the riskiest assumptions for these investments and what would have to be true where you don't have evidence. And then can you have a plan to test that? And in a way, that's similar to how I work with VCs or their early stage portfolios in the Valley, which is more like, okay, what are the risky assumptions? And do you agree with how the founder sort of thinking through this? Like, what's their thought process? Because what I've noticed sometimes is like, you can find out pretty clearly, do people sort of explain away all the evidence that they don't agree with?
Hand waving, right?
Yeah. And so if you think there's no risk here, I know all the answers. There's like, oh, that's actually a risk, So I try to be really flexible in my approach. But it's promising to hear what you're saying, because I do agree with you in the sense of it's easier than ever to get something out there and start getting some traction with it. And I'm hearing that word much more, traction. That was sort of a niche thing, and I didn't hear a lot of that framing. And now I'm hearing it more and more because of what you said. You could spin something up in Lovable, jump on Product Hunt, jump on Reddit, jump on Hacker News or something, and drive people to it pretty quickly and start to see our people interacting with it. But I do think behind that is the problem you're solving, as you mentioned. I am a little nervous that people are just spinning up stuff without really either understanding or delving into the problem space much. And I think we're going to see a lot of churn in that regard with a bunch of stuff people have coded on a weekend or during the week. And
I would almost argue that's not a bad thing. Like, there's no guarantee in this world anymore. And if you spin up something that gets passed up and it goes away, that means one, either you didn't have a solid enough idea and you didn't continue to innovate on it and you just kind of rested on your laurels, or 2, the framework around what that idea was built on has radically changed. And now in the last few years, and I definitely think in the future, you're going to see these frameworks change dramatically. And even as you're mentioning, like how you value startups and how you value going through diligence, one of the platforms that we have been rolling out alongside one of our portcos is around that. Let's get the humans out of the diligence as much as possible. How do we hook into the actual metrics that we can synthetically understand what's real and what's not? We have a platform that can go through the entire code base now and actually understand the dependencies that are related to one another and the debt that is there. We can go through the QuickBooks, like hook to the QuickBooks register and see how bad is payroll in comparison to R&D, in comparison to, do they take them out to lunch every single weekend at Mastro's? Like those pieces, I foresee, if my market intelligence is right, that product that we have would be the biggest shift in, it can't be your gut feeling. It can't be the asking the questions. It's almost like you want to get all of the evidence and the information for your questions. Then you go and ask the human, here's some questions that we have, right?
Yeah, it's a difference of looking at something versus looking for something in a way. So this is exciting. So looking forward, maybe like what's one big assumption that you want to test with what you have now that sort of keeps you up at night?
I think one big assumption is, how can I reduce communication barriers between multi-domain folks? So one of the philosophies I truly believe is AI has transformed the ability to translate not just between languages, but between different types of people. So technical to non-technical, product to CEOs, CFOs to legal, et cetera, like being able to really help empathize and understand and actively listen to the other person on the other side of the table, rather than just kind of talking over one another and really not creating value for whatever situation it may be. And so as we've been building a lot of things within the Skafld Studio OS, one of them is every conversation that we're having, how do we make sure that we are rapidly following up with the action items from it, this potential scope changes, get assumptions out there, like anything, and do it in a transparent way so that it's not a weird, well, I thought you said you promised you're going to do this, or you're going to, no, we need to line those things up. So that way we can have honest conversations that are at the level and not just talk over or talk around each other.
Yeah, having a common language is so important. So I love that you are aware of that, and that's something that you're trying to solve. I think for people that are listening to this and they're like, wow, I really love hearing what Skafld's doing and I want to be a part of this venture studio, maybe one of the different tiers you have. What's the best way for people to reach out to you?
Well, if they want to reach out to me directly, my handles are all hurricane-CTO or charlesims.com. You can also come to skafldstudio.com to apply or reach out if you're interested in the studios, investing in any of the startups, as well as our Impact 10, which are the 10 most, what we've identified as 10 of the most impactful startups or ideas that you could try to achieve across the world utilizing AI. And that's Skafld Studio, SKAFLDSTUDIO.com.
We'll include that link in our detail page as well. We chatted about everything today. I think we could have gone much longer, so we're going to keep this one. We maybe have to have you on again. But we chatted everything about sort of the way you approach problem solving, with the Clippers, with the pandemic, with the new build, with the studio, how you've kind of transitioned to venture and how that's led you to this venture studio with the 3 tiers and how you're testing things there. I just find it fascinating, you describing your thought process and how you navigate all this stuff. And so I'm sure our listeners will take a lot away from this episode.
I appreciate it. I mean, my wife doesn't necessarily understand everything, my thought processes and all that. So that's very kind of you. At least I got one person.
This is true. Thanks so much for coming on today, Charles. I really loved our conversation. Thank you for listening to another episode of How I Tested That, where we share stories about experimentation, tips, and tricks. If you learned something new, please recommend us to a friend or colleague. And remember, keep testing your ideas.